If you look at what is happening in the Middle East, in Asia and Africa at the moment, it can be easy to conclude that most of those who go to fight what they think are holy wars are motivated by very barbaric ideas. You could easily imagine that these groups, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Jabhat al-Nusra, are merely a group of brutal people acting in a barbaric way. They are devoid of ideas, devoid of intellectual structure. In fact, though, there is a war of ideas occurring within global jihad. These ideas are incredibly important to understand because they form the architecture of jihad as it is practiced today in Syria and Iraq. Contrary to popular understanding, these ideas have been formulated and considered and reconsidered over a long period of time. They go back to Pakistan and Afghanistan, to Osama bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri in the years of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. The ideas that were formulated decades ago in the midst of war have now made their way to the battlefields of Iraq and Syria. Even today, the fate of millions in the Middle East is still ruled by these ideas of holy war. There is a comforting delusion that social alienation and sexual frustration can explain the lure of jihad for young men and women. That one of the things, perhaps the main thing, that motivates these young men and women to go and fight in the ungoverned spaces of the world has to do with feeling alienated or not having enough economic opportunity in their own societies. But that is a delusion, and indeed it is a very dangerous one. There is very little evidence that jihad is motivated either by alienation or by sexual frustration. One of the reasons that the explanation is very satisfying and very comfortable for us in the Arab world and in the West is because of two things. The first is that it relates to an understanding that we have of criminals in our own societies and how they become criminals. But the second reason is that these are comfortable explanations because they allow us to strike a superior, even a liberal pose over the jihadis without really understanding what motivates them. Jihadis believe in a radically different conception of history. Their understanding of historical events and the meaning of those events is very different to that of mainstream Arab and Western society. Jihadis such as ISIS genuinely believe they are living through a historical moment, a moment of great importance in the history of Islam and the history of the world, where their actions can have a significant impact beyond their small orbit of action. For them, a turning point in global history is coming, and so they are energized and motivated by that idea and want to take part. In the Western and the Arab worlds, we have ceded that narrative to the jihadis. We have, at best, a pockmarked narrative. These militant groups, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, have a political ideology, and that ideology is rooted in a narrative, in a version of history that they tell themselves and their supporters. It is this narrative that attracts recruits. Think of the narrative as a necklace, with the pearls as political events and the string as the story holding them all together. For ISIS, this necklace is complete. They can easily string together the Iraq War, the occupation of Palestine, the war in Kashmir, and many other events into this narrative of a war against Muslims. Yet Western discourse has no such coherent narrative. The officially approved narrative is pockmarked. It has to leave out many things. There is no link, for example, between the 2003 Iraq War, the attack on Libya that helped to topple Gaddafi, US support for Israel, and the current battle in Syria. And that means that the intellectual architecture that they have built is much simpler and more coherent than the intellectual architecture that we have built to explain history. That gives them a significant intellectual advantage over the narrative that the West and the Arab world is promoting. That is very dangerous, and it means we have, in effect, ceded the intellectual territory to the terrorists. We have a fantasy about their motivations and a narrative that does not adequately combat their narrative. The more we see jihadis as simply alienated young men, the more we misunderstand what is animating them, and therefore we miss the root causes. Jihadis don't simply want to watch the world burn. They want to remake the world in their own image. And if it is hard enough for us in the West, in the Arab world, to fight an ideology we understand, as we saw with the Soviet Union, then it is impossible for us to fight one that we don't even realize is an ideology. Without a clear understanding of what the jihadis are fighting for, we cannot drown out the clarion call of ISIS's jihad. There is an intellectual war that is being fought, a war of narratives. ISIS and its fighters know what they are fighting for. Unless we do as well, we cannot fight them and we cannot win.